Mike, let's get on the carousel. When I say the carousel, I'm not even just talking about the coaching carousel. I'm talking about the coaching carousel, the coordinator carousel. There's several individuals who are getting on both, it seems like, this offseason. First off, this is the most fascinating coaching offseason since when?
I don't know. It feels like ever. Now, there have been 8 vacancies, I think, a couple of years ago, but to have 10 and to have them happen the way they did, we always have the revolving door from the dysfunctional teams that are firing coaches seemingly every 2, 3, 4 years. But you add in the Bills' job, the Ravens' job, the Steelers' job. That really changes the dynamic. So I think that all things considered, this is the craziest. And also because as of 3 weeks ago, we knew there were 2 openings with the Giants and the Titans. They'd been open. But the only clear vacancies were going to be the Raiders and the Browns. And everything else, who knew what was going to happen? There were hot spots to watch, and a lot of them heated up. So I think this one really is the most dynamic and confusing. And it just feels like a lot of these jobs, we have no idea who's going to end up taking them.
Just to hammer your point home, I mean, the Eagles this morning report comes out that they've requested an interview with 30-year-old Declan Doyle. And the reason they can do that is because Doyle would call plays in Philadelphia. Is that surprising to you at all? After 1 year under Ben Johnson, Declan Doyle's getting a shot to interview for a job with a team that just won the Super Bowl last season?
Here's why it's not surprising. I think that the Eagles just generally are experiencing a challenge when it comes to finding an offensive coordinator. Think of how many different offensive coordinators they've had in recent years. And as those coaches and other members of those prior staffs make their way around this very tight-knit group of NFL coaches, the word gets around about the challenges in Philadelphia. And even though they've done a very good job of keeping a lot of the stuff under wraps and circling the wagons and saying nothing to see here, you're stepping into a spot where the head coach has an offensive background, but he seems to over-delegate to the offensive coordinator. There have been swirling questions about whether or not quarterback Jalen Hurts goes along with whatever it is that the coordinator wants to do. And frankly, I think that if you want to be successful with the guys they have, you better have a system designed and ready for Jalen Hurts. And so if you've got a playbook you want to take with you, you better be ready to tear it up and create a new one that suits the skills and abilities, the strengths and limitations of Jalen Hurts. So I think that just the overall vibe in Philadelphia right now with the roster, with the coaching staff, I think it makes the job less attractive and appealing to coaches who have options elsewhere where they can go and more confidently run their system.
Well, and he's not the only one interviewing, Mike, as we've seen Al Harris now in the mix for not just the Commanders, but also, unfortunately, the Green Bay Packers. What do you think the likelihood is of Al Harris getting a job as a defensive coordinator?
Well, look, I think he's going to have a chance. We see how the players feel about him. And, Vance Joseph, the Broncos defensive coordinator, explained this last week because he's a candidate for some of these vacancies. Obviously, he can't be hired until the Broncos season ends. But other teams that are looking to get it right try to, what's the word I'm looking for? Poach assistant coaches from teams that have gotten it right. They want that recipe. They want some of that success. They want to plug it in. And when you see what the Bears have done this year, when you see what the Bears have started to put together, the assistant coaches become more attractive. I mean, it always goes that way. You rarely see a land rush for coaches from the teams that were bad for the most part. It's always we want to bring in someone from a team that is good because we want some of that vibe. We want some of that swagger in our locker room.
What do you think about this whole Matt Nagy thing that's been going on, Mike? Because he essentially is out in Kansas City now. Thought he was going to get the Tennessee job. I think he's interviewing for the Philly offensive coordinator job now, and Eric Bieniemy has slid right back into Kansas City. Has he sabotaged himself? Is Matt Nagy going to be a head coach again?
Well, I think that what happens in Kansas City, they get to a point where it's time for the coordinator to graduate out of the position, which makes it surprising that they've swung back to Eric Bieniemy. Now, as of a couple of years ago, there was a vibe that maybe some of those players would would like to have Eric Bieniemy back. I remember before one of the Super Bowls that they won, he came and spoke to the team, and the team was abuzz by the return of Eric Bieniemy. So it really doesn't shock me that they've gone back to Bieniemy, but they got to the point where they were ready to move on to Bieniemy and put someone else in, and it was Nagy back in that job again after his time as Bears head coach. And it just feels like it's not really a firing. It's just like it's time for everybody to move on. And it felt for a while over the weekend like he was going to get the Titans job. You got the connection there to Mike Borgonzi, who's now the GM in Tennessee, had been in Kansas City, but they obviously decided to go with Robert Saleh instead. And now with Matt Nagy. And I think Nagy probably is better off taking a coordinator job than becoming the head coach of a perennially dysfunctional team, because when you get your second chance, if your second chance doesn't work, and if you're out in 2 or 3 years, you're never going to be heard from again. So I just think big picture for Nagy, he's better going to a place where he thinks he can thrive as an offensive coordinator than jumping on an opportunity just because the window's open. Like if Arizona becomes a possible destination for him, I think he's better off finding a good coordinator job. But it is a strange and awkward situation where he's yet to be hired by another team and they've already filled his spot.
Mike Florio joins us every week here on Rahimi, Harris, and Grote, the creator and editor of Pro Football Talk. And Mike, it's interesting because we've got so much drama going on. I feel like the NFL has slowly morphed into the NBA. The latest out of Buffalo. I'm very curious. Terry Pegula, the owner, saying something about how his team, basically Sean McDermott was the problem and certain draft picks weren't Brandon Beane's idea, but instead putting it on the head coach on his way out of the door. What do you make of what's going on in Buffalo right now?
That press conference yesterday, number one, it was way too long. I said on our morning show, PFT Live, that is on NBCSN, Peacock, and elsewhere, I said we could take the full 2 hours and just play that press conference, press pause, and react. And we would have reacted to like 12 different things. We've already got 7-8 stories posted at PFT from that press conference, and I have more that I'm going to put up at some point. There's so many different angles and wrinkles, and I don't think they did themselves any favors at all. I don't think Terry Pegula helped himself. He interrupted Brandon Beane on several occasions, interjected some things that created this issue now about who really wanted Keon Coleman there, because the core tug of war between Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott is the talent the issue, is the coaching the issue. And clearly Terry Pegula decided that the coaching was the problem. The talent's there, but it's a tough needle to thread. And this idea that, as Pegula explains it, he wasn't thinking at all about potentially firing Sean McDermott. And then he walks into the locker room after the divisional round loss to the Broncos, the heartbreaking overtime bad call in the opinion of the Bills, and he decides by reading the vibe in the locker room that he needs to fire his head coach. That's just strange to me. And I think what they're trying to do more than anything else, and as we talked it through this morning, it finally crystallized for me, they don't want Josh Allen to blame himself. They don't want Josh Allen to think he got Sean McDermott fired. So I think they've concocted an explanation aimed at getting him not to feel like it's all his fault that Sean McDermott isn't there. And now the challenge is to find a coach who recognizes the realities of the situation. He works for Pegula. He works for Brandon Beane. They run the show, and you're expected to at least get to where Sean McDermott got and get farther. And that's a ton of pressure. It's a great opportunity, but it's a ton of pressure on whoever takes that job.
And then Mike, down in New York, John Harbaugh seemed very happy to be there, had a lot of chats with the local media. We don't know that Joe Schoen seems as happy and confident. What do you make of that situation?
Well, this morphed from a situation where Joe Schoen was going to hire the head coach. And it's human nature in that situation to look for someone that you can trust not to come in and try to usurp your authority. And for the Giants, for at least 50 years, the GM has been above the head coach. So we had the announcement that Harbaugh's going to be the next coach, and they're working on a contract, and it took 3 days to work it out. Why? Because Harbaugh doesn't want to work for Joe Schoen. He wants a direct report to ownership, and now we're seeing changes being made to the structure of the football operation. I know it worked for George Paton, the GM of the Broncos, when Sean Payton came in, because my first thought was George Paton may be on borrowed time. Sean's taking over. The challenge for Joe Schoen now is to figure out how to make John Harbaugh happy. I would be calling anyone and everyone in the Ravens organization to find out all I could about John Harbaugh and what it's going to take to coexist with him, because if Harbaugh has some success early on, he's going to have the juice to make the recommendation to someone in the building that he needs to be given the opportunity to hire a GM.
The most secure job in the National Football League, and maybe even in other businesses, is being the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Once they get somebody in there, who's going to be the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike?
Well, they've got a bunch of different options, and it's like going to the Cheesecake Factory and you look at that menu and you've got 6, 7 things you want to get right. You got to pick one at some point.
It's going to take a while
at some
to
point,
sort
you got
through
to pick
that.
one. And if we look at how they've handled it historically, dating back to the first Nixon administration, they hire defensive coordinators who have never been head coaches before. They did it with Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and Mike Tomlin. So if we look at that formula, which hasn't been used many times, I think that Chris Shula, the Rams defensive coordinator, becomes a very compelling candidate because Chuck Noll worked for Don Shula with the Colts. Chuck Noll went from being defensive coordinator for the Colts in Super Bowl III to head coach of the Steelers 15 days later at the recommendation of Don Shula. So there's some connective tissue there. And the Steelers historically have made hires where we've got these relationships and these big picture things. But here's what they recognize. In the 19 years since they hired Mike Tomlin, the game has changed. More offense, greater sensitivity to player safety. Is hard-nosed, rough-and-tumble defense the way to go, or will they look at an offensive guy? And will they look at a guy who's in his 60s who may not be there for at least 15 years? It went 23 years Noll, 15 years Cowher, 19 years Tomlin. Could Mike McCarthy, the Pittsburgh native who won a Super Bowl against the Steelers 15 years ago and then coached the Cowboys after that, could he be the guy that gets the job? And could they break from their tradition? This one, we'll learn a lot about where the Steelers are right now, but, there's pressure. When you've gotten your last 3 hires right, dating back to 1969, the pressure's on to get it right again.
Or you could look at it like you're at least batting 750. There's always that side of it, too.
That's true.
I do want to ask you about Coach of the Year. We were talking about the concept of sometimes the perennially best coaches don't get Coach of the Year. Mark made the case for Kyle Shanahan, rather, because Kyle Shanahan is perennially successful. We talked about the turnaround aspect. How do you think this plays out?
The loose standard for Coach of the Year typically is the coach of the team that most exceeded the generally accepted expectations for the team heading into the season. So that makes Mike Vrabel a viable candidate, Liam Cohen, Ben Johnson. Who expected any of those 3 teams to be as good as they were? Shanahan becomes a compelling candidate because it's more about coaching a good team, a Super Bowl team that had more injuries last year than they could overcome, through more injuries this year than they should have overcome to get to where they are. But I think it's going to be Vrabel or Cohen, possibly Ben Johnson. But look at what Vrabel did. Who expected the Patriots to be 14-3 after 2 years of 4-13? So, and then there's Mike Macdonald. I mean, he only took the Seahawks to the number 1 seed in a very competitive conference. And meanwhile, Sean Payton's not even one of the finalists, and he took the Broncos to the number 1 seed in the AFC.
Because he's been there and he's done that, and that's kind of what we are. Something we have been there and done that is an 18-game schedule, by the way. I remember when there were 2 byes in an NFL season. What do you make of the comments that Robert Kraft maybe sneak revealed about where the NFL is heading, whether it's that or the every team plays an international game every season? And how soon do you think this will be implemented? Because I think we all agree it's going to get implemented.
In answering a question about international play, that's when Kraft nonchalantly said there's going to be 18 regular season games and 2 preseason games. They have wanted this for years. They backed off because of the unprecedented focus on player safety, and they knew you couldn't reconcile expanding the regular season while also caring about the overall well-being of the players. After they made some safety changes, then they were able to justify going to 17. I think we're going to see 18 at the latest in 2031, maybe 2032. What's going to happen is if they don't reach a deal with the union to expand the regular season before 2031, when the current CBA expires in March 2031, just 5 years away, the NFL will lock the players out again until they cry uncle and agree to 18 games. So the question is, and this is why they agreed to 17 games back in 2020. They knew what was coming. So let's just go ahead and work it out now. And everybody will make more money. The question is, how do we navigate this world with 18 regular season games? And it's disingenuous to say, well, there's 20 total games. It used to be 14-6, then it went to 16-4. Now it's 17-3. We're just going to 18-2 because the starters, the contributors, the regular players aren't playing in those preseason games. You're talking about a greater overall workload, wear and tear on the players. So the players need to make more money. And at the end of the day, the question is, will the players ever miss a game check to stand on principle of not going to 18 games? And the answer is no. And one, you mentioned 2 buys. One reality there, if they want to land the plane on President's Day weekend every year, they're going to have to start the season again Labor Day weekend. If you throw in that second buy, most years you're going to overshoot President's Day weekend if you don't start on Labor Day weekend. They abandoned that in 2001, and I think they're going to have to go back to that if they want to have an expanded season, 2 buys, and make it all fit in this calendar that they're trying to have, this full 3-day weekend with Sunday night being the Super Bowl and people not having to worry about going to work on Monday.